Kalimera and good morning to wherever you are in the world. My name is Aaron Daniel, a wedding filmmaker based in Canada, but not unfamiliar with the rest of the world here. If you're new, I want to welcome you to my channel where I talk about wedding filmmaking, not so much on the gear aspect, but I'd like to comment on the more psychological and longevity side of what our work brings us to do. And today specifically, I want to talk about something that has been quietly steering almost every decision I make as an artist and as a human being, really, even when I didn't have a name for it. I call it aesthetic ethics. If that phrase aesthetic ethics is sounds a little woo-woo or maybe even academic, I don't want you to worry. What I mean by aesthetic ethics can be said in a question to ask yourselves, which is, what kind of human being am I becoming through the things I find beautiful? And if you make things for others, specifically for wedding filmmakers or other artists, creatives, solopreneurs, there's a second question attached to that first one, which is, what kind of human beings am I asking my viewers to become through the way I shape beauty for them? Those questions have, maybe you can call it, they've been disturbing me in the best ways recently. They're the reason I've stopped offering 5-minute highlight films in my wedding film business, and they're the reason I get a little uncomfortable with the way social media pushes everything into a quick, punchy, vertical spectacle, if you can call it that. And these questions are also the reason I've spent nights reading people much smarter than me, like Roger Scruton, Dr. Anjan Chatterjee, Iain McGilchrist is one of my favorites. I've also started to delve into Dietrich von Hildebrand in his aesthetics volumes 1 and 2. All this to put into an understanding. This is my book, by the way, Viewer's Protagonist. I've been reading a lot of these authors and professionals and thinkers on the topic of beauty, all in hopes of really understanding why some frames in the wedding films we create feel almost reverent, almost respectful, and urge us to feel a sense of love, whereas some other frames can come off as pure flattery or surface level compliments, nothing too deep. So in this video, I want to open up the discussion of aesthetic ethics in wedding filmmaking. I don't want this to be like a TED Talk. I don't want you to think about it in terms of like a listicle of 3 top things to do to make your wedding films more beautiful. I don't think I have the authority or the pretense knowledge to comment on beauty in its entirety, but I'd much rather this video be more like a sit down with me, with a friend, asking very honestly what our eyes and ears are doing to our souls. And I hope that makes sense. Again, I want to preface this by saying I can only share what I believe at this stage of my life. This isn't the final word on anything really. It's just where my conscience has taken me so far. And so I want to keep this a little light, and I want to go into this saying to keep what has weight and let the light stuff wait. Why beauty is not just taste. Let me start with a confession here. For a long time, when people said things like beauty is subjective or it's just your taste, I nodded along really and politely went along with things and tried to keep the peace. It meant no one had to feel judged for what they themselves subjectively found beautiful or found loving, But something in me always felt a bit unsettled with saying that, because I could feel truly in my body that not all beautiful things did the same work inside me. Not all things had the same level of beauty, to put it into a description. And I want to expand on that a little more. There's a difference, I think at least, between standing in an opera house with your whole nervous system vibrating from the live strings of the orchestra, the human voices, watching the performers move on stage, There's a totally different experience when you compare that to a compressed recording of that same opera on your phone while you half scroll through your emails. You know, in both cases, you might say that this opera is beautiful. But is it really? Are you experiencing the same thing? The music is the same, the colors are similar, but again, the experience is not the same at all, at least from my understanding. In my book here, I once wrote that what moves us in a moment of real beauty is the whole, not a list of little parts that you can break down into the opera of good lighting, good costumes, or good sound, you know, and think, if you were to break it down in that way and to think that you've captured the whole essence of that beautiful experience into mere parts. I don't think you can separate beauty into its singular components. Again, what I had written in chapter 5 of my book, Viewer's Protagonist, the whole is not its pieces. And when we try to translate that whole into a few descriptive words, or a few seconds, a few 45-second punches for Instagram, for TikTok, for YouTube, it's not the same thing. And at some point, I realized that if I keep saying beauty is just taste, I felt as though I was just pretending that distortion doesn't matter. If I did continue to say stuff like this, it felt like I was pretending that there is no difference between work that honors the whole of reality and work that chops it up into efficient little TikTok bites, you know, and I can't pretend that anymore. And I started to really vocalize my feelings, especially in the wedding film space, not just in Canada here, but internationally, especially being a judge on multiple film competitions right now. I think I'm at 3. I'm judging 3 different competitions, and it's so exciting to see all the work that comes in, and also to cross-reference my experiences and my thoughts and my philosophies around what beauty is. And speaking about philosophies, the philosopher Roger Scruton here, he wrote the book Beauty, a very short introduction. I'm still going through it. I think I'm just over halfway through, but I read a lot of it while I was on my travels in Malaysia and Italy a few months ago. And it really stuck with me as I started to experience the opposite ends of the world and the way architecture, for example, is portrayed. What has informed my new understanding of beauty comes from Roger Scruton and what he's been arguing for years. When we say something is beautiful, we're not just saying, I like this. We are, in a quiet way, saying, you ought to see it too. This deserves your attention. When we say something is beautiful, we're speaking as if that thing has a claim on us. Let me say that again. You ought to see this too. This deserves your attention. And that tiny word of ought is where ethics, at least how I understand it, slips into aesthetics. We don't hold what is beautiful. For example, we don't hold a beautiful wedding film. We don't hold a beautiful piece of cutlery, a beautiful piece of furniture. We don't hold what is beautiful. We don't force a wanting of something beautiful. But what is beautiful wants us. What is beautiful holds us. The essence of a thing that attracts us is its beauty. And to me, in my understanding of what Roger Scruton introduces in his book Beauty, is that the defining factor of what makes something truly beautiful is its openness to holding us. How inviting is it for us to enter into its presence and be held by its presence? That's my running, working definition of what defines something as beautiful, or what defines its level of beauty. What beauty does to the brain. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a Canadian wedding filmmaker who spends too much time in the editing suite, my editing bat cave, my cold background here. You can see it's starting to really snow. And so I really keep to myself, and I can't comment on things from a huge industry perspective. I can only comment on beauty here in this particular instance. by what I read and see online or through the authorities that I find very interesting. So now when I talk about the brain, take it as a curious practitioner or reader or someone who's entertained and really enjoys reading about and taking understandings into my practice, and not so much a hard lab coat doctor studying this topic through multiple surveys or something like that, you know? But anyway, all that to say that I really enjoyed Dr. Anjan Chatterjee's book, The Aesthetic Brain. The aesthetic brain becomes really helpful here, and he talks about how beauty isn't some fluffy extra layer that goes on top of what something brings to the table. It's beauty. Beauty, I think, to put into words, is wired into our nervous system. Evolutionarily speaking, Dr. Chatterjee describes what he calls the aesthetic triad. When you experience something as beautiful, three networks in the brain start working together. And so, talking about the triad of beauty here, the first is the sensory motor system. The sensory motor system, your eyes, ears, body, the raw perception of color, line, movement, sound. That is our sensory motor system coming into light in our experience of the world. The second of the triad is the emotion and reward system, areas that process pleasure and pain, desire and aversion, and this is where beauty lights up the same circuits that respond to food, touch, social connection. And so the third of the triad is meaning and knowledge, the meaning and knowledge system, all your memories, associations, cultural training, the stories you attach to what you are seeing. When something is beautiful, when something strikes you as impactfully beautiful, it's because those three levels in that moment are aligned in a certain way. Your senses like it, your emotions feel drawn to it, and your meaning-making brain feels there's something fitting or right or truthful or good about it. Beauty isn't an abstract idea living in a cloud, but it is very much a concrete pattern of attention in a very physical brain. And so why does this matter for ethics? I think it matters because our brains are plastic. They change based on what we repeatedly feed them. And if you constantly give your nervous system quick hits of visual sugar, your brains will start to crave that more and more. If you repeatedly linger with slower and more gradual, complex forms of beauty, your brain will gradually learn to take delight in that instead. So when I choose how to cut a film, what music to use, how long to hold a shot, or for example, show a father's hand reaching out to his daughter's shoulders, or the groom's eyes locking into his into his newlywed partner's eyes, rings, mouth, eyes, ears, whatever it is that our subjects in frame are looking at. I'm not only trying to create a look within that frame. We as filmmakers are participating in shaping the neural habits of the people who watch our work. I know that can sound a little dramatic, but on a small scale, it's true. This is where aesthetic ethics begins for me. Beauty is not neutral. It literally trains our desires. Truth, goodness, and beauty as one fabric. Now, from a more spiritual and philosophical side, this is where the old idea of the three transcendentals has gripped me. Truth, goodness, and beauty. And I spoke about this in a previous video as well, or at least touched on it. I didn't grow up really using that language. I know truth, beauty, goodness are very much tied to religion and spiritual belief. St. Thomas Aquinas was one of the most vocal about the three transcendentals. But I'm just starting to explore it. And I stumbled into it after over a decade of shooting weddings and feeling that some films that I made were technically beautiful. Some people might call it technically beautiful, but to me it somehow felt hollow. Some films of mine whether or not I like to admit, were a little hollow. And the more I paid attention, the more I began to realize why. I can't call something beautiful if it lies. If I pose a couple in a way that makes them look like something they're not, just to impress other filmmakers or to grab the algorithm's attention, it might create a visually stunning frame. You know, the colors and composition might be perfect, but if the frame betrays who that couple is, I can't truthfully experience it as beauty anymore. I experience it as flattery. And maybe that's some verbiage we can provide to our couples. We can say that some shots might be flattering, but it's not beautiful. And I encourage you to do that in your own practice. If the way I work on a wedding day is manipulative or disrespectful, if I treat the couple or their parents as props, if the final film looks luxurious, something in me can't rest with that because the goodness is missing. If all of that is there and it's still good, I can truly enjoy it. But if it's missing the goodness of the human behind the eyes on frame, I can't sit with that. And over time, this became a kind of, I guess, inner rule for me. And I'm still battling with how I try to approach or the rules by which I can approach goodness, beauty, and truth in my work. But as of now, I can only call something beautiful if it's both truthful and done in good conscience. And this is where aesthetic ethics lives in my daily life. I would not like to think of it as something that I practice in theory or think about in theory, but practice in real life, you know? So some things I like to refer back to, or some questions I like to refer back to are, am I cutting this scene to honor what really happened or to exaggerate it for social media? Am I choosing this music because it fits the couple or because it makes me look trendy? Am I directing this moment to help the couple relax or to force them into a mood that is convenient for my portfolio? And to be fair, I fail at these questions all the time. I don't say this as someone who's figured it out. I say it as someone who's felt in my gut the difference between a film that sits right with my conscience, perhaps your conscience as well, and one that keeps whispering, you twisted something good. You distorted something out of beauty. You took what was truthful and made something else of it. And philosophers like Dietrich von Hildebrand talks about beauty as a kind of value that calls for a fitting response. It's not just that beautiful things please us. It's that they're worthy of being loved in a certain way. And moral goodness lives in answering that call of honesty. For me, the call sounds like this: show things as real as they are and treat people as people, not as material. If I betray that, it doesn't matter how fancy the color grade is. The problem with highlight culture. Let me bring this down to something very concrete now and practical. If you have followed my work, you might know that I recently stopped offering 5-minute highlight films for my wedding clients. And that decision surprised a lot of people and surprised even me. Because for years, I loved cutting those punchy, very energetic highlight edits. They're fun. They do really well on Instagram, and I think at least they showcase a lot of my skill as both a filmmaker and editor. But at some point, I really had to admit that something felt off. A wedding day is often, at least for me and my team, between 12 and 14 hours sometimes. It gets a little wild to put into words. And it's a truly dense timeline of human reality. Generations in one room, secret tensions, quiet reconciliations, inside jokes from childhood that to me might sound a little cheesy, but to them it's everything. compressing all of that into 5 minutes started to feel less like distillation and more like an erasure of what was meant to be represented. You know, in my eyes, I don't know that putting a full 24 hours or however long it ends up being into a 5-minute highlight is really conducive of what it means to represent humanity, which in my eyes, at least, again, to me, is what the purpose of wedding filmmaking is. Wedding videography, wedding cinematography, however you want to name it. I think our purpose as wedding filmmakers is to cultivate a sense of longevity of a bloodline, of a family, of multiple generations for future generations. Could a 5-minute film be done well? Absolutely. I've seen beautiful short pieces that are very honest and very moving, and I'm not condemning a duration as principle. I'm simply saying that for the way that I work and for the way my conscience has evolved over the past decade, I can't pretend that 5 minutes captures what needs to be held. Some things need time. Time for silence, where nothing happens, but everything deepens. You know, and time for tension, for slow build-ups, for the kind of scenes that would not necessarily go viral, but will make a grandson, for example, cry 20 years from now. Social media, at least from my experience of it, doesn't really reward that kind of breathing time. You know, it rewards something you could call highlight culture, the kind of geist of what we're currently living through, the zeitgeist. It rewards constant extraction of the most extreme glittering moments from a day, cut into a vertical reel that says, "Look how cool I am." You know, there's nothing wrong with a fun reel, I think, and I genuinely enjoy them, but that's why I often recommend couples highlight content creators. Content creators have the sole purpose and job to gather those punchy, shareable clips, and I will forever be on board with this new sort of wedding vendor. Content creators do a wonderful job at capturing those vertical moments, but the work that I believe wedding filmmakers should be striving towards, wedding videographers, wedding cinematographers, I think we should be striving towards films that feel almost like heirlooms. And compared to content online, they're not the same thing. Sometimes that can be confusing for us as wedding professionals, and also for couples that are looking to hire the right people. A wedding film for me is not meant to be a sales tool in the way that content can be used as a sales tool. Content is a means to an end, but I think the work that we produce as wedding filmmakers is the end. When I realized that we're making the end product, aesthetic ethics inside of me really demanded a change, and it felt disingenuous to be present for an entire day, to witness so much, to capture so much of the meaningful milestone, all to give a quick, short piece that quickly moves past or gets fast forwarded among the sea of content that our crazy attention short minds can't seem to hold on to, you know. I hope that made sense. I want to get to the point that I stopped offering highlight films for the extended versions of 10 to 12, at least that long, preferably 25 minutes of work, to let the day breathe, to let the progression of human life breathe as it's being represented through our work. Some people might take it as a form of distinguishing a brand amongst others that also do highlight film work, but I just want to assure couples especially that I didn't do it just to be different, but it was something that was a little more honest to me, and that's how I want to move forward through through the next decade of Aaron Daniel films. Does this honor truth and goodness? And can I really call it beautiful if not? Many times the answer at 5 minutes was a no, and so I've changed the way I do things. What philosophers of beauty are really warning us about? When you read people like Roger Scruton, again through his book Beauty, an introduction, a very short introduction, you might get the sense that he is this stern English figure telling me to stop everything that current social media is telling me to like. It's like he's saying to defy pop music, to defy modern architecture sometimes, and to stick to old classic designs of the world. I think that's maybe on the surface level what people might understand of him, but that's really just a caricature of his, you could call it even a meme of who he might be. But if you listen a bit more carefully, what he's actually worried about is not the people disenjoying. What's the opposite of enjoying? What Roger Scruton is actually worried about is not that people enjoy simple pleasures. He's worried about us gradually losing the ability to tell the difference between things that, again, flatter and things that have a deeper honor of humanity, a deeper honor for humanity. Kitsch was a cool term that he brought up, I think in the first 1 or 2 chapters. Kitsch, by Scruton's definition or illustration of the term, are those images, those songs, those ornaments, and even buildings that trade in ready-made emotions. Kind of like seeing cute puppy poster memes, tear-jerking, cringy almost montages or paintings of a perfect sunset, where in the public's eyes the emotional response is almost automatic. You can the way I interpreted it was that things that are kitschy are I see it as cringy because you're being told things almost too directly, where you're not invited to feel things the way you would feel things. Kitsch, I think, gives us the feeling of beauty without the weight of reality. You could almost equate it to fast food, where it imitates the surface level of real nutrition. It tries to be nutritious when it's just an imitation or surface level of love, of grief, of patriotism, of sanctity, of deep belief in something. But it removes the difficult, ambiguous understanding and the cost of what it means. In Scruton's terms, real beauty reconciles us to suffering and finitude. Finitude. Is that a word? Things that are finite. Real beauty has a limitation, whereas kitsch or something cringy edits out that 3D true realness to it. It edits out the suffering and death almost, and gives us something that's a little too cozy, an aftertaste without facing the trueness of life itself. And so why is that a moral problem? To me, I think it's a moral problem because if we feed ourselves sentimental illusions long enough, we become the kind of people who prefer those illusions over reality. And this is aesthetic ethics in a sentence. If we feed ourselves sentimental illusions long enough, we become the kind of people who prefer the illusions over truth. And to bring up The Aesthetic Brain, which is such a good book, from the neuro side, Dr. Anjan Chatterjee here describes how our reward systems adapt. And if you bombard the brain with exaggerated stimuli all the time, for example, scrolling through Instagram, we begin to get too comfortable and too acquainted with the hypersaturated, the extreme cuts, the constant novelty of different things. When that starts to happen, normal life starts to feel dull. You need more and more to feel anything at all. And Scruton, again, along with Chatterjee, are looking at the same landscape from different angles. One is asking, what happens to the soul? And one is asking, what happens to the brain? Both of these questions are truly asking, at least in my understanding, are you staying careful with what you call beautiful? And as someone who edits images and sounds and feelings for a living, I feel that warning from these two professionals is very personal to me, because I know how easy it is to go one step further in intensity in the wedding timeline, to go a step further in intensity with the way maybe I direct couples, further in intensity with the way I manage my team, for example, a bit more drama in the grade, a bit more bass in the sound, in the soundscape, and excuse me, and maybe a bit more punch in the way that I give direction. Sometimes that is nice to have, and sometimes individually, none of those directions or levels of intensity are sinful, if you want to call it that. But together, over time, as things start to intensify continually, they might train us as wedding filmmakers, along with our wedding film clients, our couples. They might train us to expect reality to be louder and shinier than it actually is. We may come to expect a real wedding with its awkward pauses and half-finished conversations, We might expect reality to be totally different than our expectations of it. And I think that the problem there is that we eventually feel or can feel disappointed by comparison, and that's the saddening part. The loudness, if you can call it that, how intense the comparison becomes. And this is where I hear the voice of one of my all-time favorite authors and neuroscientist, psychiatrist, psychotherapist, Iain McGilchrist comes to mind. His book, The Master and His Emissary, touches on the brain hemispheres, and his latest publication in 2 volumes, The Matter with Things, really gets at the heart of reality versus the virtual world. His work on the divided brain describes how one hemisphere, our right hemisphere, tends to treat the world as a living relational presence, while the other hemisphere, our left hemisphere, tends to treat the world as useful representations and tries to apprehend and understand the world through the perspective of using it as a tool to reach out and grab onto things and use things for its own selfish purposes, to put in a way. If you're interested in art, philosophy, and science, particularly neuroscience, I highly, highly, highly recommend Dr. Iain McGilchrist. As you can see, I included a lot of post-it notes and make reference to it often enough in my own book, Viewer is Protagonist, because I find that his philosophies on art and the world and our perceptions of it are aligned. I really enjoy how the way we may run a business successfully is also akin to creating good art, which, to put it into one sentence or idea, is approaching things as a whole. And our art can lean in either direction, really, with the right hemisphere's living presence in the world, our right hemisphere's perception of the world in a living presence, or we can approach our art with our left hemisphere and and almost get trapped in abstractions and templates. Aesthetic ethics, at least to me, is choosing the first path more often. How this shapes the way I shoot and edit. Let me get very practical for a moment here, especially for any filmmakers who might be watching. If we want to take these kind of concepts and place them into our practice as filmmakers, let me try to paint a picture. When I walk into a room, for example, on a wedding morning, I'm not thinking first, what will look impressive for Instagram? Instead, I'm trying to ask quietly, what is truthful here and what is good for the people in this room? That question shifts everything from the way I choose to stand, like how close I am with my camera. It changes whether I interrupt a conversation between mother and son. It changes whether I request a song to be played for the bride and the bridesmaids to dance to that matches either my mood or matches who they are as personalities. Now I still care deeply about the aesthetics of it all. I care about the composition, the lighting, the color, the pacing. I can be a nerd. I can nerd out about all these things, but I want those tools to serve the people that I serve, not the other way around. I don't want the people on camera to be there only because it, for example, helps my composition. I wouldn't direct someone to stand specifically here because I think it'll be good for Instagram. Maybe it will be, but maybe it won't, and that's not the purpose of it. When I bring the footage into my editor, aesthetic ethics can show up in a lot of small decisions along the editing timeline, like how long I choose to hold a shot of a particular face. And from a pure engagement perspective on social media, it might make sense to cut away sooner from that face, but from an ethical aesthetic perspective, I would most likely leave a shot a little longer than comfortable because I know this person might not be here for much longer, and the family, I think, will be or would be grateful for that extra second hold of their grandparents' eyes. It's also key to note how we approach musical choice. I've always been drawn to pieces that are emotionally open rather than emotionally locked or direct or, again, kitschy. Songs that can hold joy and grief at the same time I am really attracted to. In my head, I like to call those types of songs emotional, agnostic to emotion, emotionally agnostic, where the music doesn't directly dictate exactly how I feel, how you should feel, but instead give space to invite you into that interior, and it invites you to experience it as a viewer or as a filmmaker, To me, I think it's more ethical to approach music in that sort of way, and it treats the viewer as a subject who, again, participates in that interior meaning, not as an object who needs to be manipulated into a fixed mood. I don't want to manipulate the people who I am showing my work to. I would much rather approach it as an open conversation. Again, also, I'm not saying this is the only good way to create work. It's simply the directions that my conscience has nudged me toward these past few years. Questions for your own aesthetic conscience. You might be watching this and thinking, okay, this is interesting, but what do I do with it tomorrow? How can I apply this to my work next season? How do I impart or how do I implement this knowledge on my current wedding film project? And so I want to offer a few questions that I ask myself all the time. And hopefully you can adapt this sort of framework or understanding of things into your own field, whether you're a filmmaker, a photographer, a designer, a florist, a stationery, whatever creative work that you're in. I invite you to ask these following questions to yourself. Number 1, what is this piece of work asking me to love? Every film, every song, every architectural design quietly teaches us what to admire. Is it inviting us to love status? Is it inviting us to love spectacle, to love self-display? Or is it inviting you to love courage, tenderness, patience, and reality as it really is? I don't think there's a formula to this, and sometimes a flashy film, although at first glance can be very kitschy, if it's well done, a fashion film can deeply honor the dignity of the body. Whereas on the other end, sometimes a fashion film can reduce the body to a commodity almost. The difference lives in the posture of the filmmaker, the maker, the designer, the creator, and the way the work at the end treats its subjects. What is this piece of work asking me to love? Number 2, what kind of attention does this reward? Does this work only function if I skim it while doing 3 other things? Or does it gently ask me to slow down, to notice subtleties, or ideally be present? I'm not saying everything has to be slow cinema. There's a place for playful, fast edits. But if my entire diet of beauty requires micro attention and never deep, thought-provoking attention, my ability to sit with my own life will eventually decay. At least I think so. I think it'll eventually atrophy if I'm not exposed to things that ask of me deep contemplation. I think if I'm deprived of that, I'll eventually become depressed, and I don't want that to happen to anyone. So what kind of attention does this reward? Number 3, who becomes more real because of this? After watching or creating a piece, do the people that it portrays feel more real? Do they feel like complex humans? Or do they feel like characters in your head that can move around for your own purposes? In our wedding work, I personally believe this is the difference between using couples as fashionable models and revealing them as actual people with histories, with flaws, with sometimes, again, cringy, kitschy inside jokes. You know, if I can answer who becomes more real because of this, and if I can answer that in a way that lines up with truth and goodness, I know that I can start to feel beauty from it. If not, I think we can eventually feel a kind of dissonance in our work, a kind of lesser meaning. And I try to listen to that as much as I can. A word to non-artists. Before I close, I want to speak for a moment to those of you who don't see yourselves as artists or creatives, even though you most likely are. You might be, for example, a lawyer, a nurse, a parent of 5 children, someone deep in, for example, accounting spreadsheets. Whatever it is that you're doing, maybe this whole conversation of aesthetic ethics is, maybe you think it's reserved for museums and film buff nerd enthusiasts. And I really don't think that's true. It's for you as well, aesthetic ethics. Every time you choose what to put on your wall, every time you choose what song to add to your playlist in your car, every time you choose what kinds of videos to let autoplay when you're tired at night, you're quietly schooling your own heart. You're teaching yourself what to call beautiful. And the crazy thing is, you're also teaching the people around you. Your kids pick up playlists, I think, faster than they pick up philosophies. Partners, our significant others, they absorb the tone of the media we personally consume day to day as well through you. So even if you're not touching a camera, I truly believe aesthetic ethics belongs to you. And feeling that belonging can be as simple as listening to one song once in a while, instead of putting on yet another show to melt into the couch with. Perhaps light a candle and let yourself listen, like really listen to one piece of music that makes you feel more human. Or another example could be standing in front of a simple, honest, truthful photograph of your grandparents and let yourself grieve. Let yourself grieve and or be grateful. Or go for a walk without headphones and let the silence of the trees really ring in your head and let yourself listen to what your soul is saying. These small acts, I think, can be the way we tune our internal strings. Where I am heading with all of this. And I'll begin to end this video off here. I don't claim to have solved the riddle of beauty. There are people, quite literally, who've spent their entire lifetimes trying to make sense of what it is. I'm, for me, simply just someone who spends, again, my times, my afternoons, my mornings, my evenings in the editing suite, the editing cave, and who has some sort of interest in humanity and what it means to speak with humility. I'm simply someone who wants to understand what it means to create something beautiful. And so I can't say for certain that I know what it is. All I know is that I'm someone who can and has the opportunity to point my cameras at people during some of the most heartfelt, charged moments of their lives. And from that vantage point, I've come to form these philosophies and come to believe these few things quite strongly. And to summarize into 3 concise, short points, I'd like to say that 1, beauty is not a luxury item on top of life. It's one of the ways reality calls us to pay attention. 2, the way we answer that call is never neutral. It's our internal moral compass, and it's always shaping us and the people we serve. And 3, in an age of high speed, high spectacle, and high manipulation, one of the most radical aesthetic acts is to be truthful and kind. That is what I mean by aesthetic ethics. It's why I will keep trying to make wedding films that don't just look good on social media, on your phone, on your iPad, on your Apple Watch. I want to create films that, feel honest. Films that look real on a living room screen 10 years from now. It's why I sometimes choose a quieter shot over something loud but punchy and really engaging on social media. I don't think we should do things for that purpose. Aesthetic ethics is why I am more and more interested in beauty that is rooted in reality, not just in trend. If any of this has stirred something inside you, even the smallest of small, tiny discomforts or curiosities, I invite you to sit with it. Notice the things in your life that you already find quietly beautiful and ask yourself why that is. And then also look past the things that make you feel in awe or the things that are profound to you and look at the things that leave you feeling smaller. Look in the opposite direction and ask yourself why those things do that to you. Notice the images and the sounds and the feelings and the designs that leave you feeling emptier, even when they look quote unquote impressive. You know, ask yourself those questions. You don't need to become, what would you call it, an aesthetic philosopher around these subjects or concepts. I'm here just to invite you to become a little more honest about what your attention is doing to you. I think I'll leave it there. If you have any other questions, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Maybe I'll make a video on certain topics that I touched on. I would love to go more in depth about some of these books and some of the books that I don't have with me here. I hope throughout all my videos, I'm kind of making sense. If I didn't, I think that's okay, because I'm still working it out too. I don't know what beauty is. Who am I to say or comment on what the reality of life is? I mean, I'm just a kid. I feel like just a kid, living by himself in the mountains of Quebec. And so all I will do for now is leave you with this question that keeps following me around. What kind of person are you becoming due to the things you call beautiful? And what kind of person do you want to become next? Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you all next time.